Hey everybody, this is Emily Thomas. I'm here with Tony. Tony of previous Sociopath Lessons, I think is what we call them. And Tony, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you before, which is what is it like to be you?
I think things have changed a little bit in the last couple months since you and I have talked, and I think I've turned from being like an awful negotiator and like at a consumer level to totally enjoying conflict and haggling and negotiating. Because I've been trying to apply some of the things that we talked about originally, and it's become a minor addiction. So I'm a little different. I'm trying to, apply psychopathic principles and ways of looking at the world into my life to make it a little easier and better for me, to get over my neurosis a little bit. So that's what it's been like for me lately.
I actually just read something recently about like the gender wage gap and like how much of it they attribute to women just not asking for as big of a salary as men ask for in terms of salary. I
Yeah.
was like, that's crazy to me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but but it kind of like rings true for me too. I don't know why. I think there's a even I have kind of a hesitation to just ask for things. Sometimes I see people um not in kind of like this jealous way, but like in this way of like, I wonder how this person kind of like manages this. Where I think it's kind of common in Mormon culture. My girlfriend has noticed it too, and she encounters enough Mormons to kind of she'll be like, "Oh yeah, this guy is basically one of those wheeler dealer types, is what we call it."
Yeah.
Which is they have like this sense that things should be like it's a strong sense of entitlement, not in this bad way, like oh entitled and they're taking money from orphans or something. They just have like this sense though that the world will probably provide for them in whatever ways. And so they don't really have like college degrees. They don't tend to, but they often have a pest control business.
Interesting. Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, like
Uh-huh.
these kind of areas where you can be construction maybe, but construction I think is like a little too regulated for these
Hmm.
types. They really kind of gravitate to these businesses that they charge you $200 a month or whatever. Who knows if it's doing anything, but
Right.
you're so fed up with the whatever. And I think it's like cheap for them to get employees, or maybe they have
Hmm.
kind of nursery or agricultural business. They just have kind of like most of the pest control is the best example. Maybe they also sell things kind of door to door. But maybe they're selling pest control or solar panels and stuff. These are the types of people or whatever. And these type of people, they just have like this idea in their mind that that's the way the world works. And so I think of it less as like a narcissistic thing. And I think of it just as kind of like a very positive outlook on kind of the world and like the probabilities of things happening. And I've met a couple other like non-Mormon wheeler dealer types or whatever. And I think, they tend to do well, I think, for themselves, because if they're willing to just try 20 different things, if not this, then we'll do, this little shop or whatever that seems to have nothing and somehow makes a ton of money, or they'll do like pavers. That's another common one.
Oh, okay.
It's not really construction. It's not even concrete. It's just pavers. Does your
Uh-huh.
driveway need to overhaul? We'll do some pavers, in
Uh-huh.
your pool area or something. Like they find these these like
Yeah.
areas
Yeah.
where they don't have to have like any sort of licensure, but there's like still a degree of skill or something, and then they charge you whatever they want to charge you. Another one I know is this guy makes like antique looking patio lighting fixtures that kind of make it look like like Spanish colonialism style or whatever, and he
Hmm.
just gets them like made in Mexico, and he just sells them to rich people for their patios.
Hmm. Some people have a knack for finding these little business things. Are you
Yeah.
saying basically that there's a overabundance of Mormon-owned pest control companies?
Yeah, I would guess
Really
so. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And in a way, like, okay, so they're Mormon or whatever. It's just kind of like, it reminds me, I teach paralegal students, and one of them like wrote back to me and was like, I'm dropping out of your class, I really enjoyed it or whatever, but like paralegals get paid like nothing compared to HR people, human resources. And so
Mm.
she was like, I had no idea that the wages were so bad for paralegals. And she's like, I forget what she said, if she's going back to HR or just doing HR instead, but like making twice as much for like half the work.
Oh my
I
God.
think there are
Uh,
just kind of like things where I don't know if HR is a grift,
I think
but
it might
it's
be.
like they just won't accept taking the paralegal job, getting paid, such long hours, all this stress or whatever. And you're basically getting paid, like what fast food workers in California now make as their minimum wage or
Oh
something.
my, I didn't know that.
I
Wow.
know, yeah, it can be that bad or whatever, and it's like I don't know what is the deal. Like, is there something inside of me and inside of you that says like I'm not going to do the HR thing, I'm going to do the paralegal thing? Like I know this other Mormon guy who is a car mechanic, and it's like I almost think, does he intentionally undercharge? Like, does he not want to be rich? Is he worried that he'll prosper? And actually, I have another friend who has said that one of the reasons why she kind of has never wanted to succeed big in life is because she thinks that if she did, then her dad, and she's like, like not young or something, she's not in her 20s or something, she's like a normal adult age or whatever, but that her dad would take it from her,
Mm.
would find some way to take the money from
Oh,
her or whatever else. So she has like almost like this built-in like throttler or something that, like on like I think e-bikes, this is true too, and like electric golf carts and stuff, they have like a throttler that, I think that's what it's called,
it's
that
like a governor.
limits, maybe, yeah, governor, yeah, it limits how fast the thing can go, right? And so that's her, is that she's just like, I'm not going to ask for more or try for more or whatever, because people have their reasons. So I guess that's kind of the interesting thing, is that it's not it's not stupid because people have their reasons, but what are the reasons that you have for it, and what are the reasons I have? Because the reasons I have for the things that I do are like slightly different. And I've also been in these situations where I've like totally undersold myself, and then luckily I've just gotten to the point where I'm just so busy and I sleep so much of the day that I have so few leftover hours that that I really
Well,
just am like, I'm only going to do what I really, really want to do, and they're going to pay me. It has to have both those things or something in order to, you know, I mean, luckily I have that many opportunities that I'm able to turn everything else down. But I also think, how can we all channel our inner Mormon wheeler dealer guy?
yeah. So that woman that you were just mentioning who puts a governor on her
Yeah.
life to keep herself from being what? Stolen from by her father. She's Mormon also?
No, she's not.
Okay. I was wondering, how strong a role did religion play in your life growing up?
I would say, they I would say 4 out of 10.
Okay.
I would say in a couple different ways. Obviously, my family, my siblings, and going to church for like 3 hours back in the day every Sunday. But then there were also like in high school, I woke up and did seminary. Like seminary went from 6:20 a.m. to 7:10 a.m. and then you'd start school at 7:30. So that was every morning, going to seminary. And then we had like weekly activities as a youth, from the age of 8 to 18. You would have like, Wednesday nights were like this, go spend an hour, making arts and crafts or playing dodgeball or whatever else it was that we were doing. And I had like quite a few friends, but I grew up in Southern California, so it's not like I grew up in a predominantly Mormon community. I would say the population, Mormon population here is like 3% of the population. So you run into Mormons all the time, and for sure there'd be like in my graduating class of high school of 420 people, there were probably 30 Mormons, so it's like plenty of them, but like definitely not dominant at all. So the Mormon culture did not influence the external culture, I guess, like it does like in Utah or Idaho, places in Idaho, parts of Arizona or something. So I only experienced it like in these little bursts, but like I mean, how many hours a week was that in high school that I was basically doing church stuff? Was like 5 hours plus 3 hours of church, 8 plus the 1 hour a week thing. It was basically like 9 to 10 hours a week of doing stuff like with other church people. I think my parents' understanding of Mormonism, that's the interesting thing, I guess, is like especially recently, I've been thinking more about like my childhood and some of the ways that my parents' beliefs manifested in the way that they understood the role of a parent to be like
Mhm.
the role of children to be like in their religious beliefs, but they're also, I think, just like inherited from their own parents. So kind of mixed up in religion, but not necessarily like actually accurately representing, I think, like Mormon theology. Uh, to a large extent. It kind of seemed like my parents didn't really want to have children. I don't even know that they necessarily wanted to get married, but they felt like this was something that was expected of them. And probably, especially for the generation before them, maybe their parents' generation, I think that was the cultural expectation as well as the church expectation. Is that I think most people, for instance, like my grandparents who were getting married. I think they got married in the early 50s. Like that's what people were doing in the 1950s, right? It's just getting married in these heteronormative relationships and like having a bunch of kids or whatever. Or at least this is what I've come to understand from like looking at my grandparents and watching the movie The Hours.
Okay,
Is it
yeah,
Michael Cunningham or whoever?
yeah.
And the opera. Now there's an opera, The Hours, too,
Oh.
which I thought was good. And yeah, that's what they're kind of doing. And so then my parents just kind of fell into that. I recently read this kind of tweet thread. Uh it was about a book where the person's kind of, I think it's Against Everything is the name of the book, and the guy's basically saying like you kind of have to be against everything in order for you to just live your own life. Like you can't get caught up in the culture, you can't get caught up in the trends, you can't get caught up even in the latest music and movies, because he basically kind of postulates that what we all really want probably is like maximum free choice. And to the extent that we're just in these currents of culture, we're not really exercising our free choice at all. We're not he said the problem really is that you're not even thinking. You're just kind of going with the flow. And so
Hmm.
you're not living a life that's truly yours because you're living a life that's kind of been handed to you by the, accidental circumstances of your birth, like you're American or you're not, or, et cetera, et cetera. You have a particular race, ethnicity, language that you speak. And so all these things are kind of decided for you in a way. And his suggestion is that we just have to kind of fight against that. I think my parents fought against that like zero.
Okay.
They were
Yeah.
literally just like unquestioningly following, what they thought was this pattern, like A, B, C, D, E, F, G about things. And I think you can kind of see in people who do stuff like that. I call it white knuckling. You're like white knuckling in some way because you're not having like the full expression of self in your life. And without the full expression of self, there's something that I think, based on my own personal experience and a lot talking to other psychopaths, you will lack that sense of meaning or the sense of fulfillment or purpose in your life. If you feel like you're just doing things that have basically been, you're defaulting into choices rather than actively making the choices. Like, oh, my girlfriend got pregnant, I guess we'll get married, like stuff like that, where and we kind of don't make that choice as often as the previous generation, or the generation previous to me makes that choice. But there are other things that you're still defaulting into, like a 40-hour work week, or going to college for some people, or whatever else it is, staying in the same location that you grew up in. And I like to think that about my parents, that they just kind of were in some ways like prisoners of their own ignorance, or lack of desire to kind of rock the boat. But then they got stuck in these situations, where they had however many kids, that they did not want.
Hmm.
And so what do you do in these types of situations? You just try to find other ways that to like soothe your mind, and in a Mormon world, where like I think a lot of people turn to alcohol,
Hmm.
or other substances in these types of situations, is my experience of seeing these types of people in the Midwest. That's a very common in my experience.
Hmm.
Very common thing is people feel like they're white knuckling, like they're married to someone that they don't really love, that they never really loved,
Hmm.
like whatever the situation is. And rather than kind of like rock the boat, since they've always just kind of gone with the flow, then they keep going with the flow, and they just kind of like ease the pressure of the whole thing, of kind of being like a little bit of a fish out of water, so to speak, because they're not living their true self. They ease the thing with alcohol. And with my parents, I think it was just weirder things, like, god forbid they drink alcohol, so it was like, okay, instead it's going to be, playing mind games with my children, or
Oh,
like,
interesting. Interesting.
yeah,
By the
like
by the
weird
way,
stuff like
quick
that.
quick question, going back to something you
Yeah.
said. You said, I asked like how much religion played in your life, and you said a four, and then you followed that up with 8 to 10 hours per week.
Yeah.
Now, on my scale, that would be considered like a nine.
Oh,
eight to
really?
10, eight to
Well,
10 hours a week of religious studies,
uh-huh.
or being exposed to that. It seems like quite a bit. I mean, not an overly. I mean, it makes sense to me, but I wouldn't call it a four. Well, let's split the difference. Call it a seven.
Yeah.
I think, to
Really?
me.
Because you
Hmm.
have like, I'm just doing the math. If you have 12 functional hours a day, then seven days a week, that's 84 hours. And if you have 10 divided by 84, so really it was only about approximately 11% of my usable hours, 12.
Okay, wow, wow, we really
That's why
got
I
it.
say four, it's
Okay,
like,
okay. Well,
excluding sleep time and stuff.
and I grew up Catholic, and
Mm,
we would go to church on Sunday and spend a whopping 2 hours. So you had
yeah.
8 to 10 hours of religious studies. I had two per
Yeah.
week. Yeah, so that's just, yeah.
And that's another thing that's weird, I think, about so I guess it's like complicated, because in a way, like, my parents, I think, were very motivated to externally appear to be Mormons, and like good Mormons, and like normal Mormons, with like, there's like definitely a pressure to have your kids look a particular way, do these activities, etc., but not in like this terribly oppressive way. But I think I didn't find it to be oppressive, although I think now, like, how did I like survive on so little sleep?
Um,
Doesn't really
you
make
said
sense.
you said rather than drink, they elected to, what did you say, emotionally
Yeah,
manipulate.
like play like mind games with their
Oh,
kids or
mind games.
whatever.
Yeah. Can you describe that? Can you give me a couple of examples
Yeah.
of that from, like, I don't know. Yeah, anytime.
Sure. So, one of them that my dad does, we call information warfare. Now, these mind games, they're not like super insidious or something. They're actually so kind of like banal in a way that
Hmm.
you almost kind of don't realize that maybe there was more damage happening than you thought initially, because you're like, this is kind of a stupid game and we know what you're doing.
Hmm.
But the fact that it's constantly happening, I think, is more like the thing that's like it's a weird choice, maybe is the best way to put it, since we're calling things weird now. But so information warfare would be like, let's say that he knows the dates of a particular event, like your aunt's wedding that you're expected to go to. Like, what are the chances of him like answering openly what that date is if he thinks you want to know?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's so whatever. He'll say something, and like the second he thinks that he has information that you may want to know, even need to know, it becomes like this weird, like it's selective hearing, he'll like ignore everything. Seems like he'll ignore everything you say, and then he'll, you know, it's obvious though that he's listening because he'll respond to some other thing that you say. He loves to correct people and he loves to be correct or whatever. So he often just kind of says nothing until he sees that you've made a mistake and said something that's incorrect, inaccurate, and then he'll join the conversation as if he's been listening the whole time, even though it's he's been pretending to be asleep or whatever. Like I don't think that that's like a terrible thing to do to children. It's kind of more quirky than
So
anything
what if
else.
you came in the room and you're like, "Hey, what's Aunt Matilda's birthday?"
Hmm.
Dad says, "Wouldn't you like to know?" Or
No,
what
he
is
just
this?
he pretends like he doesn't hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. So he ignores you until you finally say like, "Oh, Aunt Matilda's birthday is like, January 1st." And then he'll be like, "Nope, that's wrong."
Oh, wow. Wow. So he likes to plant landmines of information. Kind of
Yeah.
he likes to play the I gotcha game all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think before like the word gaslighting was a thing,
Hmm.
I used to think, this is just like, okay, you know, almost like almost like the weird games that you'd play like as children, like with I don't know. I think parents can tease in like these ways, but his teasing was always just like a little bit like messed up. So another kind of example of this is for whatever reason, my mom was gone on Easter Sunday. I actually think she may have had, so maybe she was visiting family, or maybe she had like a gig, like a singing gig or something. So Easter Sunday, we wake up. The tradition in my family is that we look for our baskets, which have candy in them and eggs, and often like a present. Like a couple presents, like a Easter dress or something, or like sandals or swimsuit, like something for like the coming summer, kind of like a little mini Christmas. So we're looking for our baskets, and this tradition too is if you don't find your baskets, then you ask your parents for hints, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's in a hot place," and so you look in the oven, in the dryer, or whatever. But in this instance, we can't find them. We're asking for hints. He keeps giving us hints. He's like, "Yeah, look where a bird might see," or something. We're looking for all these things. Finally, we find the baskets. They are empty, like in the storage place where they get stored when it's not Easter. And so he's just been having us like run around the house for like the past hour and a half with these hints for fake baskets that he never
Oh,
bothered to like set
interesting.
up. Yeah. So it's not like terrible stuff, but just kind of like, what's the point of any of this to you, dude?
Right. And what can I ask, what was the feel when you discovered that? How old were you, by the way?
I probably that Easter, like 8-ish.
Okay. What do you remember about how when you discovered like, oh, they weren't hidden, they were just exactly where they're supposed to be with nothing in them.
Yeah.
What did you feel about that? Like what were your thoughts and feelings about like what the heck?
I have like this memory of it that I'm not sure is like an authentic memory, but it kind of like illustrates at least my feelings about it now. I'm
Hmm.
not sure contemporaneously because memory's so flawed. But I have like this memory of like going into his room. He's still in bed. He's just been hanging out in bed this whole time, giving us hints or whatever, having us run around the house, and like with the baskets, the empty baskets, and just dropping them on the foot of his bed and like making eye contact, and then just walking out. That's the memory I have of it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And okay, but do you remember how you felt about that at the time?
At the time, kind of like, I mean, I think that the thing that bothered me and bothers me maybe more now, I can't tell if it bothers me more now or if it bothered me then, I just wasn't aware of it, is that there was just so much bullshit from him, that
Hmm.
it never was just the truth. It never was reality. It was
Hmm.
always, like hiding things and trying to like in a way erode the sense that reality mattered at all. I think is like a good way to kind of put it overall about him, because I think to him reality, like there's that like Bible verse which Mormons also believe, which is like, and the truth shall set you free. And I think he has never thought that to be true. Like he's never had any sort of belief or testimony that that's accurate. I think he always thought that the truth was something to be afraid of. And so I think that he kind of intentionally played with the truth and with reality, and kind of like in this way of like, why should you guys care about reality, like he almost was like trying to say that like a belief in reality was absurd. He tried to make it seem absurd, in all these different ways of, like the way that he presented things. I think like another interesting example, like uh obviously there's like another common thread that is the self-serving nature of which reality presents itself. In which he wants us to think of reality as absurd, but like when he wants reality to like, when reality's in his favor, then he wants us to think that reality can't be questioned, right? And so that's kind of like the information warfare, where it's like, oh, Aunt Matilda's birthday's January 1st. No.
Wow.
Dropping these big
Uh-huh.
truth bombs
Right.
of like,
Yeah.
you idiot. I can't believe
Mm-hmm.
you said that, So uh that was kind of a weird thing. And I still think, I think the thing that upsets me about it now, as and it is I'm more upset about it now, than I ever have been. The whole thing.
Hmm.
All the
Yeah.
stuff that we've been talking about is that I think my kind of impression is that he does it with my mom currently, like in a way that is eroding her sense of reality too. So it's almost
Hmm.
like, is she kind of experiencing like preliminary dementia? Or is he just telling her like the weirdest shit, you know,
Hmm.
as reality, like, oh, this particular thing happened. Like he's basically like the equivalent of a scammer on my mom in a way. Like I think I've mentioned this before in other videos, but my girlfriend has elderly relatives who were scammed. It was like $10 or $15,000, where they were called up and it was like, hey, this is the IRS, you're in
Oh,
big trouble, we're going to arrest you, and we need a bunch of gift cards from you to make up for
oh
this. We need
no.
$15,000 in gift cards, and they're super old. They're like well into their 90s,
Oh.
but still, for whatever reason, very like independent living. So they were able to get these gift cards, and even the thing, good on this person, I guess, manager or something who worked at Kohl's, the store
Hmm.
in the United States. When they showed up and asked for the $5,000 in gift cards, the manager was like, "No, I will not do this. You are being scammed."
Hmm.
And they were like, "Oh, great! Now we just have to go to the Kohl's across town or whatever because you're
Oh my
you're
gosh.
not going to do this." That's how invested they were in this like bullshittery. And so I think
Mhm.
that's what's so difficult to me now is, as somebody who has always been, I think, like at my core, even though it's weird to say it, like a very sincere person who has loved the truth, and really I feel like the truth sets you free. Like I feel that statement 10 out of 10. I think that's a true
Mhm.
statement. And that from personal experience and et cetera, et cetera. But to have to kind of live with this like illusionist basically, who's always trying to get you to doubt your own reality, like that's almost the point and purpose of like all these various little games that he's
Mhm.
kind of like playing. Never straightforward, never just says the thing type guy, Unless it's like 100% like a smackdown of you, then he'll say the thing.
Right. You know, it's so interesting because that, like I think I mentioned before, in certain situations, I felt like there's like a switch that I can flip to kind of feel nothing at all.
Mm,
And I've often wondered if people who, experience psychopathy in their lives had a moment in which they flipped a switch where they can feel they're like, you know what? And it almost sounds like that. It's like I'm done playing these games. I can't go on this emotional roller coaster of whether I'm right or wrong or whatever. I'm done. I don't want to play this game anymore. And mentally, you just flip that switch and don't ever switch it back on.
yeah.
So you're not roped into this gaslighting situation that you're describing, which sounds so insanely passive aggressive.
Yeah.
Like, and why I don't understand the. Now, I'm not here to
Mm.
pass any judgment on your relatives or anything, but it's
No,
such an
feel free
interesting.
to. I've been like calling
But I
him
mean, it's
the
just like,
worst words recently. I'm like, it just kind of helps to
yeah,
just put the label on it sometimes.
yeah. I mean, it's just very crazy for a grown person to bully an 8-year-old
Yeah.
with with like, you know what I mean? Because when you're a
Yeah.
child, I mean, uh, 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 holidays and the traditions around holidays that involve bright pastel things. It's exciting and tactile and wonderful and it's exciting and your imagination is all wrapped up in it. And then to be like, I don't know, I don't even know what you would call that. Like that's a form of psychological bullying in my estimation. To do
Yeah.
that to a child, like why are you doing that?
That's the
Like, who does
question.
that? Who the fuck does that?
Yeah. That's the question.
Um, So I'm wondering, curious, and by the way, if I'm asking too personal of questions, please shut me down. But was
We'll do that.
the
I'll
East,
shut you down.
yeah,
I'll
the
just
East,
politely
what?
be like, I declined that question, but yeah, don't worry, you can ask whatever.
Okay, cool. No, and that's another thing. You asked like what I'm like now. I like conflict. I mean, if you're just like, no, shut up, orphan, or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah. Um. So is the Easter thing, is that a core memory, do you think? Or is that just one you just grabbed out of many?
I think kind of both. I think Easter, like, I think that like just the weirdness of the whole thing too, and the fact that maybe my mom wasn't there. Like it
Mm,
Easter is just like it's like even maybe more celebrated than your birthday, especially in my family. We didn't really celebrate birthdays that much. So it's like just under Christmas or whatever. Imagine if you just woke up on Christmas and the like Grinch, like the tree is
yeah.
missing, there's no gifts under the thing or whatever. It would
Mm,
be such a
mm,
weird like what just happened, like I have another core memory that's kind of similar where we moved to our new house when I was 3,
mhm.
and I remember I still have like this memory of being in like the old station wagon and having the cat in the car, and because I was so weirded out even as a 3-year-old, I was like, cat shouldn't be in the car, this is crazy, am I right? you know So I think things that are just so weird, I think are like at least I kind of remember them a little bit better. Like that was a really weird thing to have the cat in the car.
Mhm,
And same thing for
mhm,
Easter. You like wake up and it's just nothing. And it's like so I remember it probably more because of the fact that it was such a weird Easter than I do even the fact that he was like giving us the hints that were wrong. And I think
mhm,
I confronted him about it, like, decades ago or something. I was like, why would you give us hints? Like, if you forgot Easter, you could have just said, hey, I am sorry, your mom's gone. And I spaced that it was Easter. Like, I'd be surprised, like, it kind of shows you, like, how invested he was in fatherhood
hmm,
to forget
mhm,
Easter. And the one thing, like, our mom is gone, I almost think, too, so let me finish this, but then I'll
mhm,
get to what I think maybe his true motivations are. I've been thinking recently about this. He could have just said, like, the presents are here. We'll do Easter another morning. I'm sorry or whatever. And it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been, like the worst thing ever. It's not the best thing, obviously, to just kind of forget it or whatever. But you know what I think now? I've been thinking this recently about, some of the worst things that he did were often kind of uh, like a failure, like a neglect. It wasn't like, of course, there's the stuff, I talk about in the book too. He's tearing down doors, he's hitting people,
Mhm.
he's like
Yeah.
violent, he's
Uh-huh.
like screaming, he's like losing his temper, spit flying all over the place.
Mhm.
He's like an absurd person. But in some ways, like I think the things that were more permanently damaging, and maybe that's kind of a weird thing to say coming from a psychopath who probably became the way she is because some of this
Yeah.
stuff, is
Uh-huh.
that the stuff he failed to do. So like the failing to do kind of the Easter things. But recently I've been thinking um that maybe he failed to do those things, kind of went limp in response to like to punish my mom. I think, like I think when he got angry and he's like kicking things and breaking things and stuff, I think that those were in some ways like his, I don't want to say more authentic self, but there was like an honesty to them, I think, that didn't feel as badly as when he kind of intentionally chose to neglect us to get back at my mom. I think that
Mm.
for whatever reason now feels more like salient to me. Like the thought of like, you Machiavellian bastard. like
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
you were like starving your children or skipping holidays or just like dropping the ball on like, major life events just to kind of punish my mom for whatever reason she wasn't there for on Easter. Almost certainly. Doesn't it seem like that is true to you too, Tony?
Yeah.
Because I was thinking about this the other day, a couple days ago, and got like really sad about it. I even posted like a little short about it. I think it's called like Listen to Your Intuition, where I had this realization because I read this. So I follow, this is a long explanation, I apologize, but just so if people want to look this stuff up too. Roshan Murphy is a singer that I follow on Instagram. She posted this post about this woman that she knows, her friend, who it's called, I think her name is Viviana. You could probably Google it. She's a quadruple amputee
Mm.
who, she's Italian. She's like a little older. She's probably like in her 50s or whatever. Um, she had a kidney stone that turned to sepsis when she was like living in the Canary Islands. And part of this seems like the Canary Islands maybe just doesn't have the most advanced medical services, because I kind of can't imagine, honestly, no offense, this happening in the United States. But her kidney stone turns to sepsis. They still don't treat the sepsis for like another 6 hours. And by the time all said and done, she's went into some degree of organ failure, and definitely uh she ends up losing all of her limbs, right? So she
Oh,
has, yeah, quadruple amputee because of the sepsis. And I was thinking about my own experience with sepsis,
okay.
which is when I had the appendicitis for 10 days, that my parents just didn't take me to go see a doctor. No, until that, the morning where I was like super feverish and looked like, death or whatever. I had like a swollen abdomen, just like every sign that there was something like dangerously wrong. So we do go to see the doctor. They rush me to the emergency room. They threaten my parents, all sorts of things, is like what I kind of remember. And then, I think, how much was my dad like shitting his pants during this whole thing? Because ask yourself, Tony, did he like F around to find out about this too? Was he playing some sort of weird game with my mom about this, like his sick child too, about this to see how long it could kind of go and stress her out and cause chaos? And I asked intuition, how many more hours would it have taken? Because I was in complete sepsis. Like I had to spend 8 days at the hospital. I had to recuperate over like the period of months. There was so much gangrene that they had to take out. I didn't do,
The color of your face must have been enough to say something is very, very wrong.
yes,
Like you must have
yes.
been pale, translucent, like you must have been presenting as very ill. What can you, did I miss how, why is he so resentful at your mother?
I think he just would do it to kind of get back at her for whatever choice she made. So let's say she
Oh,
chooses to, for instance, she was like a singer in like stage productions,
okay.
right? So let's say she chose to do a stage production, and let's say that's the reason why she wasn't there for Easter.
Hmm.
He doesn't want to say no necessarily, or like he does. I don't know why. He mostly wants her to find out about it. Like,
I
oh,
see. He
you
wants to
you
punish
yeah,
her for giving him too much responsibility. Like, oh, you're
yeah.
leaving. You're not going to be here to. Oh, maybe. I mean, maybe it's a traditional thing. Was he very religious? I mean, as far as Mormonism goes? No.
No, I don't think it was a
So,
traditional thing. I think it was more
okay.
kind of, and it's less even like you left me with all this responsibility. It's more like if something wasn't his choice, his idea in the first
Oh,
place.
you're going to get
Yeah,
punished for it.
it was more like that. Yeah,
Oh,
I
interesting.
think with
God.
her,
Wow.
because it's not like, like I remember vividly, like one of my siblings, like she was pregnant with a sibling, she was giving birth at the hospital. He's just like, coming back and forth to the house, for like various whatever things, probably doing who knows what, definitely not spending all the rest of his time at the hospital. He like
Hmm.
made us the worst macaroni and cheese. It was just like one solid
Uh-huh.
globule. He made
Uh-huh.
no efforts to stir in the packet of whatever cheese, the powder. I'm like, this is disgusting. Like, can we eat this? He burned a can of green beans. It's like, what is your problem, dude? Like, I think he almost intentionally was like, hilarious how you guys have to eat this because this is all there is. It was almost like that. It was like I think it's a sadism.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
that's what I've recently come to believe about some of this stuff. I think that's like for the same reason that I said earlier, there's like kind of a through line, let's say. There's a consistency where it's like he only, he pretends that truth and reality is absurd unless it benefits him, and then it's like, this is unquestionable or whatever, and we all have to like, acknowledge the truth and change our minds and hearts about it or something. Then it's like truth is all there is to life. And I think the through line here is just like sadism. I think,
Hmm.
punishing people and enjoying punishing people. You
Hmm.
want to hear something totally weird?
Yes.
Speaking of so what's his first name? Walls, Walz, who's just been
Oh, yes.
chosen.
The
Yeah,
vice president
yeah,
choice.
yeah, Kamala Harris's VP
Hmm.
pick, Walls. Right,
Hmm.
governor of Minnesota, I think. So Governor Walz, he's like famously pro. He had that program where he made food free in schools, right?
Okay.
And
Hmm.
my own dad is so opposed to feeding children.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
like
What?
it's the weirdest messed up thing. And I think again, like, how can you explain? Like, he says that giving children food breeds a sense of entitlement.
Interesting.
Yeah. How can you explain that except other than like sadism?
Well, it sounds to me like he has kind of like a resentment against children
Yeah.
who had any kind of privilege of any kind. Did he? I wonder if it sounds to me like he probably experienced all the things that you're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. Even worse. I mean, he had what are
Yeah.
it's called ACEs or whatever, the childhood traumas, and he's basically had
Oh.
like every single ACE. I've only had
What are you talking? ACEs, childhood trauma? Oh, I don't know.
like 40% of them. It's ACEs is an acronym. Let's see if I can look it up real quick.
While you're looking that up, I just wanted to say, I've been doing research for this project that I'm on, and I was able to interview a psychologist who works almost exclusively with psychopaths, because she works at a prison, and she has for like
Mm,
30 years, and she administers PCLR tests, and I think the MMPI, is that correct?
yeah.
Tests for inmates and stuff.
Hmm.
And she said, I was asking her some questions about, a lot of the weird stuff that's flying around on the internet. There's a lot of questions about this particular, disorder. And she said that, uh, it's not exclusive, but most of our colleagues believe that, she said, a person's personality, no matter what it is almost exclusively the product of adult influence on that person, like who they had the most adult influence with. So, she's like, I said, because I was asking about, people are saying, it's a hereditary thing, psychopathy,
Hmm.
and she's like, me and my colleagues have never seen any scientific evidence of that whatsoever. It almost always goes back to who the person's adult influence was, mostly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I could see that for sure. I think there have been like twin studies. The way that I kind of reconcile the whole nature nurture thing in my mind is that you have the genetics, something triggers it, which is the adult parental influence in your life. And sometimes it's totally like it's not abuse or whatever. It's just some sort of weirdness or something, or
Hmm.
maybe like you had to stay in the NICU for months or something. There's just some kind of interruption or something
Right.
that might have happened there. Um, but that like that's the nurture part, and that the nature, like the genetic component, is the I think that you become like I became a psychopath, whereas my siblings reacted in different ways.
Hmm.
So I that's how I kind of think of it, is that I must have had more of a genetic predisposition to psychopathy in a way, because the twin studies do suggest that there is something at least genetic happening that predisposes people to these particular things. So ACEs
Mine,
are
oh yeah, ACEs.
adverse childhood experiences, potentially
Oh,
traumatic
okay.
events that can occur during childhood. So, for instance, abuse, physical, sexual, or emotional neglect, witnessing violence in the home or community, family member attempting or dying by suicide, growing up in a household with mental health or substance use problems, instability due to parental separation or household members in jail or prison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I probably only have like I don't know, like 30% of these. He probably has like
Oh wow.
95% of
Okay.
these.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Wow.
nuts.
Okay.
His childhood is so messed up. But then I think, what are you doing? And you just rather than kind of figure out whatever your anger is to your parents for your own food scarcity, you're going to like play games with your kids with food.
I think it has something to do with, like, well, I went through this and I survived. You're being weak-minded and a problem for me because you need to be fed.
Yeah.
Here's your shitty lump of macaroni.
I think too, and like games with food with the macaroni, it's not just that. I mean, like the games with the food, if he was in charge of a food situation, it was going to be weird. It was 100% going to be
Oh
weird.
my God.
Like almost
Wow.
always too little. So it's this pervasive. He still does this. He
Mhm,
still does these weird kind of like food games with us. So
mhm.
just the other night, well, first I'll kind of back up and say there was like this one instance where I saw the way my girlfriend handled it, and I was like, I'm gonna do that next time. I saw how effective that was. But we showed up at his house. There's supposed to be food. He's like, yeah, nope, we're all 20 of us or whatever. Once we like all get together with all the grandbabies, we're basically all just not gonna we're eat snacks or something for dinner. And I was like, oh, okay, kind of thinking, I guess I can, figure something out. And then my girlfriend was like, nope, I'm just going to Chick-fil-A. She just left and went to Chick-fil-A. And I was like, why am I so reluctant to just do that? And then I started realizing how often he does weird stuff like that. So just this past weekend, he did a similar sort of thing where he said on our like group chat, he's like, I'm gonna like barbecue. It's gonna be hamburgers and hot dogs. So I show up, they're in the pool, I get in the pool or whatever. We're like having, a like mostly normal family thing because I don't even know where he was. By like 7 or 7:30, I was like, "Are we not barbecuing? What's happening with the barbecuing?" And he was like, "Oh, I decided not to barbecue." I was like, "Okay, you decided not to barbecue." And I'm like, "Well, I okay, then I'll just go to Chick-fil-A." And then he was like, because I learned that from my girlfriend.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And he was like, "No, no, 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 don't go to Chick-fil-A. I will make you something. What do you want?" And so he like gave me some options. I was like, "I will just take a chicken breast. That's fine, you know?" And so then he like brings me the chicken breast, like however many minutes later, like 30, 40 minutes later or something. And it's not cooked. And he even says, he's like, I'm not sure if this cooked or not. So I'm like eating it. At first I eat the edge and I'm like, okay, that was fine. And it has all this like barbecue sauce on it. So you can't really tell, but you can kind of tell by the texture. And the
Uh-huh.
second little strip where I'm like, uh-oh, this isn't cooked, right? And then I start having that gag reflex of like, so then I just
Uh-huh.
like set it up on the counter, and then he asks me about it. He's like, "Hey, did you not eat your chicken?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I think that chicken's not cooked or whatever." And he's like, "Oh, really? I can cook it for you more." And I was like, I think I've moved on from the chicken because the other thing he was
Uh-huh.
doing, he took a frozen chicken and then he
Uh-huh.
defrosted it in the microwave and then he just cooked it in the microwave. Yeah, he allegedly cooked it. So
Oh
it's
my
like
God.
this disgusting microwave chicken or whatever. And then he like, 20 minutes later or something. So it's just like this weird through line joke with us, I guess, in his mind, the whole evening of just asking me about this chicken now. So he's like, "Oh, I ended up cooking it for 2 more minutes and it was delicious." And I was like, "Oh, that's great for you. It's basically like a free chicken. You didn't think tonight that you'd get any chicken, barbecue chicken, and then you did get a barbecue chicken. Isn't that great? Isn't that a nice thing for you?"
Oh my
And
God.
then he kind of was like, "Sure." And then like 15 minutes later though, like my mom was like, "What's the deal with the chicken? Why do you keep mentioning the chicken to him?" And he's like, "Oh, well, explains the whole story just kind of like I've told you."
Mhm.
And then he was like, "And then she said no to the chicken, which I don't think was very nice." And I was like, "But didn't you get a chicken out of it? A free chicken? That's nice, isn't it? Who cares who ate it if it's you?"
Oh my God.
But, like, intuition told me to boss him up about this, like,
Mhm.
food thing,
Mhm.
like, obviously not in a confrontational way, but in a
Mhm.
very, like, "No, you will make me a chicken," and, "No, I'm not gonna eat this raw chicken," and, like, "Why does
Which
it
is
always
dangerous,
have to
by the
be like
way.
this?" I know. He doesn't
That's
care, though, and
dangerous. Like,
I knew that when my mom started asking, he started getting a little angry with her, and I knew it was because she was gonna find out that he gave me a raw chicken to eat, and she was gonna get pissed.
wow.
Like, it's just weirdness. Why does it have to be so weird about food? It's just all the time weird. He's all the time trying to, like, make you starve. That's the
That
weird
is
thing about it.
just fascinating on so many levels based on all this research that I mean, like just what you described to me, it just makes so much sense to me. Yeah, this is a game that you can never win.
Yeah.
And
That
so
you
you're
kind of
like, you
don't
know what?
even you
Fuck it.
almost
I don't
forget
want
you're
to play this game anymore. I give
yeah.
up. I'm
Yeah,
done.
you forget you're playing, or sometimes even as a child, you don't realize it. Like, I remember I think I even talked about this in the book, like, going to school with, like, just a bag of oranges that I had picked off our tree for lunch or whatever. And so it's so weird to me that he, um not only wants his own kids to starve, but wants all school children to starve. Like,
Oh my
totally begrudges them
God.
food, is like totally opposed to any child feeling like they can have adequate nutrition on any given day that's a school day. It's just like
Wow.
cannot stand that.
Wow. Oh, let me ask you this. You mentioned in your last episode, I think it was with somebody who's hot and gay. I think that was the
Yeah.
title of it.
Uh-huh.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, that when you were in your 20s that you realized that there were things that other people might find repulsive, is what the word that you used, but it wasn't until then, like your teenage years, it never crossed your mind. What is what did you mean by that? Repulsive? Do you mean like, are you talking psychologically repulsive, like behaviorally repulsive, or physically repulsive?
Think like socially repulsive is
Okay.
probably like kind of the best term. And it would just be like I remember these kids who like couldn't like hide their freak fest, where like this girl who had a reputation of eating worms, and why? Because like she kept playing with worms during recess, she'd be like, "Oh, I found another one," and everyone's like, "Disgusting."
Uh-huh.
And so, like, in a similar way, I remember talking to somebody, I think on one of these videos where they were just like hypersexualized.
Hmm.
Maybe it was someone else just from like very young childhood, and they didn't realize that they were so hypersexualized. They thought that everyone was thinking about sex just as much as they were as a 6 year old or whatever, you
Hmm.
know. So I kind of mean stuff more like that, where you're like, oh, isn't this funny? Oh, it was actually, now I remember, it was the psychopath guy on Mormon stories. You should be able to Google that, anybody who's
Oh,
listening and
okay.
wants to look him up.
Okay.
So he's talking about being hypersexualized and about how he would do these really cruel jokes. I think one of them was like, there's somebody who's blind or something, one of their friends, and he's like, let's change his shoes. You know, they're all like barefoot or something. He's like, let's hide his shoes so he can't find them. And his friends were like, oh, we can't do that. You know, like
Hmm.
that sort of repulsive, where you say you come up with like an idea of something that you think might be fun, and the other people are just like, that's way too scary, or that's way too mean, or that's just
Hmm.
are you a sexual pervert? Or like
Right. Right.
kind of things where you
Right.
just have like no sense yourself of like personal boundaries. And so you'll suggest something just thinking it's all in good fun, that other people, you know, will have that gag reflex like I
Hmm.
did with the chicken.
Right. Were you a behavioral risk in middle school and high school at all?
I definitely like w- without being expelled, whatever the thing was underneath being expelled in high school.
Detention.
Uh Detention, I think it was worse than that. I was like
Oh.
a referral or something, like
Oh, oh, oh,
whatever.
oh, suspended, suspended.
But
That's
the
where you
I thought
like
one below
you forced a
suspended, because
couple days off of school to think about. Like you're not allowed to
yeah,
be here. Like,
I was allowed to go to school. I wasn't allowed to do like any extracurriculars,
oh, okay,
or yeah, and I had to like, I do think there was detention and some other things, whatever it was.
okay,
So I never got fully suspended, but like I like couldn't do my softball games or whatever else for a little while.
okay.
In middle school, I definitely went to the principal's office, you know, at least a couple times. It wasn't crazy. It's not like it happened all the time. And I think it was so weird because I was just you know, like getting all these academic awards or whatever. So even at
Mhm.
the time, I think that I got the thing below suspension. Like they had just found out that I was a finalist for the National Merit Scholarship. So they
Mhm.
were kind
Yeah.
of like,
Uh-huh.
uh, what are we
Uh-huh.
supposed to do here?
Right.
I don't know.
What and what were the some of those things? If you don't mind, I mean, can you give us an example, or even a hypothetical example of
Yeah.
something that would have gotten you into a situation like that? And the reason I was in detention a lot when in middle school and high school, what's interesting about that, they would lump those things together, very much like Breakfast Club, you know? So you'd be
Mm,
in detention after school with a group of people, and it was almost always guys. Like
mm,
if there was a girl in there, we were all like, "Whoa, what the hell?" Like it was
yeah.
crazy. So I'm just curious, like what would get you into detention or whatever that other thing is?
Yeah, so in middle school, the thing that like I was mostly okay. This is true too, like through college and law school and my beginning careers as a lawyer. I was mostly okay with things as long as I saw them being also directly beneficial to me.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, let's say I'm doing a law school final exam or something. A lot of people would be like, "Oh, this is so stressful," you know, or you know, I don't like these things that they require us to do these, you know, take a class I don't like or whatever. But I could always kind of like put up with whatever the thing was if I could see, you know, in that instance, that it would represent a very good grade on my transcript. And that transcript would last forever. And I
Hmm.
had like this very, um, kind of in the same way that, like, you know, I fully funded my retirement by the time I was 30 because I just had such a crystal clear vision of what compound interest was.
Oh, uh-huh, uh-huh, yeah.
And what it, you know, like what you can do with it. And I was like, oh, this is a very powerful, like, piece of almost leverage. You know, it's like
Mhm.
when concrete's drying and you can like scratch your name in there and it's basically going to last forever. That's how I understood my early 20s to be, is that it all was just like a bunch of concrete pads that were, you know, quick drying or whatever about the set, and that I had the ability now to manipulate them and they would last basically my lifetime. And so I was totally willing to kind of do those things. Even like, back in middle school, I was engaged enough in math, and then I thought, well, if I take these advanced math classes, then I can like skip I can start geometry in middle school and I can skip this, or I can, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So I was this is the reason why I got sent to the principal is regarding the math teachers. So they told us like, okay, we know that you've been taking advanced math classes, but we're worried that you're going to get burnt out in math. And so this was like 7th to 8th grade or 6th to 7th grade. And so they made us take algebra over again, pre-algebra over
Mhm.
again. And I was like, so like, no, you have ruined my little trajectory. This makes no sense for me to show up to your bullshit class and take
Uh-huh.
algebra again. So like I terrorized that teacher. Like I like we like turn off the lights and then throw like encyclopedias at each other and at the teacher, and we were like tearing up the classroom like in every way. He'd be like writing on the board, we'd be like trying to rip out the cabinets, just like trying to like total mayhem. Like every single day, every minute of that class period was just like finding ways to induce mayhem. And so that's why I would be sent to the principals, is because I was just like, throwing encyclopedias at people's head.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And
Interesting. Wow.
why couldn't I sit there and do it? It's because it was had no kind of benefit to me. So I think similarly, like in high school, you'd be in situations with teachers or whatever where you're just like, this teacher is really not providing anything to me. And that's in those instances. And even in college, I think that I've probably like either directly or indirectly led to people quitting the teaching profession or like even higher education so many times, because I just cannot. I am so like hyper focused on my own interest that if they cannot kind of get with the program,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
then I will do anything to them to kind of like and kind of even similar tactics to my dad, to like erode their own
Mhm.
reality about things, gaslighting them,
Mhm.
like trying as much as possible to do things that are maximum damage, which is not just like a physical, like you're getting hit in the head with a dictionary or whatever,
Mhm.
but also like then pretending like it didn't happen.
Right. Right. So
Psychological
college,
damage
obviously,
too.
so so college, obviously, you weren't throwing encyclopedias or ripping off. What? Give me an example of a college version of that.
Yeah. So
Made
in
it,
that instance, I don't think I ever got in trouble in college for stuff. And
but making
honestly,
you wanting. You said something about causing a professor to want to quit.
yeah. So in that instance, it was a Book of Mormon professor,
Uh-huh.
and at BYU, you take at the time I think it was 12 credits of religion classes. Now some of these teachers are, whatever Hebrew scholars or something, and know at least academically what's going on. But for whatever reason, the Book of Mormon professors often weren't. And since everybody has to take so many of these classes, and Book of Mormon was required, you couldn't take like another class. You had to take Book of Mormon, at least one of them, I think. Like they were just these random people who are just like, I guess, random Mormon church members who've decided to teach a Book of Mormon class at BYU. Like I was just like scathing
Mhm.
during class. I like turned the class so hard against this woman that like one time I remember she was writing up on the chalkboard or whatever. Somebody was laughing at something, and she turned around and was like, "What are you laughing at? Is it me? Do I have something like on me or something? Do I have is it something about my clothes? Is it this? Is it that?" And then people were like, no, we're just laughing at like we were talking with each other or something, but just like paranoid by the
Uh-huh.
time that she's done, because she probably like walked in there and expected to have like a classroom full of like sheep kind of Mormons or something, heart of a lamb. And I just had like a black heart that was like, I don't even want to be here. And you are like, there's nothing about you or your class or the way that you teach that I can interpret as being beneficial to me at all. And so I can't even give you like the least semblance of respect
Wow. Uh-huh. Wow.
Like really cold. Now, like in
Uh-huh.
those instances, I knew well enough not to like throw books at people because whatever. So it was just the psychological. It was like the just like incessant kind of, but not incessant in this way where you're just like, oh, that's that annoying girl who always whatever. Kind of actually like my dad, where it's like
But
I
what
would
is
only
always
speak up.
whatever? Always, what is always whatever? Are you challenging anything she's teaching and trying to make her feel like she's doing it wrong or something? Is that?
Well, so in like some of the classes I've taught, there sometimes is one of their classmates who always has something to say.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
they always have a question, or they always
Uh-huh.
have like, a way to relate it to their own personal life where they want to share.
Right.
Uh and often those people they just get ignored after a certain point. So that's what I mean is like I was careful not to be the type of person who was seen to be overtly antagonistic to this teacher because I didn't want them to chalk up whatever I said to just pure antagonism. I wanted it to be effective. And in order for it
Uh-huh.
to be effective, I had to seem like this person who maybe even liked the teacher, but I was just having such a hard time because the teacher was just so wrong so many
Oh
times.
my God. Oh
Just
my
like
God.
clearly
The
wrong.
amount of
Like,
calculation that goes into that.
unfortunately, I think that it's actually the opposite of what you just said. Let me show you real quick. I don't know if you realize this, almost like you're
Oh
helping the
my
teacher.
goodness. Oh my goodness. I'm impressed. That's actually kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. So, can you describe to the best that you can imagine, from a past partner's perspective, what was dating like? What was dating you like in high school and college? Like, what would they say?
I think in high school, um, I think there in those times, like up through my 20s, let's say, there was like a lack of emotional connection.
Hmm.
That would make people think probably like I wasn't that interested in them. And that is kind of accurate, but it wasn't because I was interested in other people or I could have been more interested in somebody else. It was just like, yeah, there is this lack of a connection. It's like this big of a pipe
Right,
instead of this big of a pipe or
right,
whatever
right.
with the connection. So I think it wasn't until like in high school too, it was like very chaste or whatever, like kissing, but not like a ton, not even like really making out, sort of kissing. And then in college and, law school and afterwards, becoming more, let's say, sexually active.
Hmm.
Still kind of with weirdnesses of the Mormon like understanding of like, oh, how sexually active can you be or something. But I think when you engage in any sort of physical intimacy, that there's almost like an illusion to the other person. Uh, Especially if it's a girl, let's be honest, and the other person's a guy. But honestly, as well, especially if it's girl, it doesn't matter if the other person's a girl or a guy. I think most people don't think that a girl will engage in like a physical intimacy without being kind of emotionally at least present in the relationship. Like I think that there's like you know what I mean by that? There's like an understanding that guys, for whatever reason, a social maybe understanding that guys can basically have sex or be, have some level of physical intimacy with basically anybody,
Hmm.
and that's fine. And they just see it for what it is, which is just like the physical act or whatever. I
Hmm.
think most people don't have that understanding that girls do that too. I think maybe it's gotten more common, to understand, yeah, certain women are like, pro sex or whatever else, body positive or what, where they will, be more out about that. But I think there's still kind of that stereotype. And for sure, in my kind of early 20s or whatever, I think that was still like a very prevalent uh
Hmm.
kind of social stereotype. So I
Hmm.
think, with the relationships in high school, I don't think anybody would say that they were my ex because I think it was pretty clear to them that whatever was happening was fine or whatever, but it was never serious to me. But I think once you start like engaging in like physical intimacy with people, they would think, oh, it's serious to her, you know, because we're
Right,
doing this thing. And so
right,
clearly she must
right,
be emotionally invested too.
right.
And when they would find out inevitably, that I was not emotionally invested, I think that was the weird thing. I think it was like, how can you be so cold?
I see. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And
That.
especially when, like some of these people, who I was in these relationships with, I'm like, I'm sure you've done this to people. Don't act like this is
Mhm.
like this is like not something that you've ever done, is like, engage in like whatever kind of the trappings, let's say, of a relationship without actually being emotionally invested.
Mhm. You had a really interesting guest a few weeks ago, Robert
Yeah.
Radak,
Yeah. Red
the
Act.
repentant psychopath. He was really,
Uh-huh.
really interesting, and he mentioned, I think, a chapter on Anna and Cleckley's Mask of Sanity, which I think was kind of an amazing reference. As not only that's a fascinating chapter. It was one of
Yeah.
the chapters that I felt described one of the psychopaths that I've known, like, to a T. And
Hmm.
that and I wondered if, I mean, that chapter is fat. Do you know what I'm talking about? The chapter
Yes,
on
I
Anna?
Anna is like, that's by far, that's really the only one that I remember like specifics of and kind of very vividly from
Mhm.
Cleckley's. Is it called The Mask of Sanity?
Yeah, the Mask of Sanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think because it's just so, I don't know. He describes things so well. Like, she seemed like emotional chaos for anybody that came in contact with her, but she was completely unbothered by it and almost kind of confused about everybody else having a problem with her. And that
Yeah.
was mind blowing to me and really, really, really interesting. And while I know that Cleckley's book is quite dated in many social ways, the science, in my opinion, is kind of there. The observations and descriptions are kind of incredible, I think, and scientifically. And I'd love your thoughts kind of on that book, if you remember anything about it. I wonder if there's any case studies in that book that you kind of identified with, even loosely. And I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting that you'd identify with Anna, but what do you remember about that, if anything?
Yeah, no, I for sure identify with Anna. And I think too, to kind of your point, like how dated it is, it because I think the first editions were like written in the
40s.
30s, 40s.
Yeah, 30s and
Yeah,
40s.
I mean, you're still talking about people's failure to conform to social norms. So whatever the social norm is,
Right.
their
Yeah.
failure to conform to it. Like
Yeah.
I think I even mentioned with Robert Redact, the story about the young man who ends up like performing oral sex on a bunch of African American day laborers, and how that's
Right.
seen as being very like illegal,
Right.
just
Right. Right.
whatever, where nowadays we'd be like, good for him, or whatever. But like
Yeah.
but Cleckley, and he's interesting too because Cleckley's like kind of betrays, I think, it is true, like some kind of like expectations. Like I think even in that story, he betrays an expectation that if you were going to do something like that, you would have them perform the oral sex on you, not you performing the oral
Right,
sex
right, right, right.
on these like, I mean, he just picked them up from the field. It's not like he
Yeah,
had them shower
right,
or
exactly.
whatever
Yeah,
else
yeah.
in like the 1920s or 1930s or something, in these
Mhm.
rural whatever. So I think Cleckley's kind of like, I just can't see why you would want to do something like that a
Yeah,
little bit
yeah, yeah, yeah.
about it, which I think is interesting. I think, without it's almost kind of like that is the thing that I vibe with more than any of the details in general, is that like some of the stuff that I've done would just cause people to be like Cleckley, like I don't see why you would even want to do something like that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't know why it is that I end up kind of doing these things, like, and even I kind of don't necessarily want to do them. I guess I just don't have anything saying kind of like don't do the thing. And I think that's what I like so much about Cleckley's portrayals, the case studies, and I think it's a
Mhm.
really accurate portrayal. Is it's less that you have such a strong dominant, like desire urge that you can't kind of like keep down or whatever, and it's more like you just don't have any breaks. It's less that you are trigger finger, trigger happy or whatever, and it's more that you just aren't being careful.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah,
know what
yeah.
it is? It's like people, it's not that you're, like let's say you have like such a strong, I don't hate to misrepresent like pedophilia or something, but let's say you have a strong urge to, think about sexual circumstances with children and maybe even to perpetrate some of those instances. That would be terrible, I think, to have something like that where it's just like almost like this constant thought. Have you heard people kind of talk about Ozempic a little bit? What it's like to be on Ozempic?
Only that people get Ozempic face and lose a lot of weight, but I mean nothing else
It's been
really.
really interesting for me. Like,
Are there psychological ramifications of
yes,
using it? Really?
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know that.
In my self-reflection now, it's interesting to have learned about Ozempic and what it does to the brain. And
Oh
sometimes you can
no.
see it too.
Wow.
And Instagram always sends me these things because I usually like click on the advertisements. I just like to see the way that it's described. But it's like
Uh-huh.
it's like, oh, quiets down the food chatter in your brain. Like what Ozempic essentially is kind of doing is like taking, like, you think less about the food, because we all think about food and think we should be eating more than we actually need. That's kind of what Ozempic kind of has shown, let's say. And so it actually is useful too. Like people take it to help with like alcoholism too, because the same
Hmm.
kind of overactive kind of reward center that needs that urge, like constantly like filling in the blank. Like they say this thing about like men thinking about sex, that they think about it like every 7 minutes or something. But apparently they think about ancient Rome more frequently or whatever. But like imagine if you just didn't think about it at all.
Hmm.
Like how would your life be different? And so I think about the psychopath is less about the guy who's thinking about sex every 7 minutes, more the person who doesn't think about it at all, has, like it doesn't kind of come up in their mind. But because they don't think about it at all, like when they kind of end up in these situations, it's totally weird.
Yeah,
There's something totally weird about it. Like, hold it, what? Like there's not, because you're not really seeking to like meet a particular desire. Like there's something so aimless about it, about like the way a psychopath kind of goes about their life. And I think you particularly see it in relationships, because it's like, why do you bother? Why are you doing any of this? Like there's such, especially I think in romantic relationships, there is a drive that people experience frequently, probably typically, or like an urge. You have like this kind of desire for something, often someone in particular, and it's just so rare for
hmm,
that to happen with psychopaths. Like you can have like a passing kind of like crush, not
hmm,
just on people but on things. Like I can have a crush on surfing or skiing or something and get kind of like into it for a while or something, but it's very uh like disembodied in a
hmm.
way. Like there's not really a personal connection to it necessarily. It's more like a passing phase, like the Olympics. You may have like, a
Yeah,
great desire to be watching the Olympics, but it's going to stop in like a
yeah,
couple of weeks or whatever. So you're just like, sure, let's watch another highlight or something. But it's not going to be anything that's going to affect you long term, and that. And you're not like in any kind of way invested in either
mhm.
what's happening or what's going to happen or the outcome. And I think that's what Cleckley portrays so well. in
Hmm.
all the different case studies is just that crazy lack of investment and
Hmm.
almost like awareness and
Yeah.
definitely urgency about anything. Like the only urgency is that you just have a passing whim and you're like, sure, let's just act on it. You know, like
Yeah.
that would be the urgency. It's not like it reflects any great desire of the person who's acting on it. It's just like an
Yeah.
impulse, but it's not a major impulse. It's not like this overwhelming impulse. It just happens to be like the only thing you can hear in like the almost deafening silence of your lack of self or something. So you're like, yeah, I guess.
That's why I kind of see it almost like a, well, not even almost, but I do believe it's a little bit of a superpower in a way. It's almost like life is a video game. The
Yeah.
consequences don't matter. And that's why I think that people who don't experience psychopathy, neurotic types in particular, can learn so much from psychopaths. The ability to remain, kind of like relatively unbothered by little things is something that can be taught, I think. I've been teaching myself that a little bit. Resilience. If you remove fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of embarrassment, fear of prosecution, you can
Huh.
be incredibly successful in life. I've seen that,
Yeah.
in other psychopaths that I've known, very successful. Granted, there was some rule breaking, there's some truth massaging. Sometimes there are, courts and lawyers and federal agents involved, but regardless of that, brilliant business plans,
Yeah.
nerves of steel,
Mm.
you know, um, thoughts on that? I don't.
Yeah, I think it's true. It reminds me again of like these Mormon wheeler dealers or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I do think that you can, like, it's not a trait that's just known to psychopaths. Like, who knows why
Mhm.
these Mormons feel so insulated from the consequences of their choices? Like the negative whatever. They're just kind of
Uh-huh.
like, and I almost wonder maybe it's kind of like my dad or something. Maybe it's like they ended up with like four kids. They're like, well, I mean, either it's going to work out or it's not or whatever, but I'm not going to work a desk job just to like, feed these four mouths or whatever. There's like a willingness to kind of like, did you ever, so I was talking to somebody recently about this, about assets that get recruited by the CIA, right? Which I
Mhm.
kind of didn't know very much about this, but it's somebody who's lives in a foreign country, that that's their country, they're a citizen of that country. And the CIA tries to convince them to give them information, to basically commit treason or
Mhm.
whatever, and whatever job they have to, do these fireable, potentially criminal, I'm certain criminal, probably offenses. And why do people do it? And it seems to be one of the reasons why is that some of these people, especially depending on kind of what regime they live under, they might feel like so constantly burdened by that, and the fact that they don't have any choice in their life, and the fact that they are just kind of stuck in this particular situation, like similar to the Mormon guys with the four kids or whatever.
Mhm.
They're so stuck in it that they like reach this point where they're just like fuck it, press
Mhm.
this bucket
Mhm.
button, and then so that's how they get there. That's how they get to that point of kind of not caring, is I think they're so overburdened. Like they don't put up any kind of personal boundaries. They're just kind of like so put upon by their situation, their circumstances, their choices, whatever else, that they just are kind of like, I don't care anymore.
Mhm.
And so I think that is another way to get there.
I want to circle back really quick. What is it? What is the psychological side effect of Ozempic?
Hmm. Is that it quiets that whatever chatter, any urge that
Oh,
you have.
just
Yeah. It
oh, just
doesn't,
the food
you
thing
don't
is what you're
feel
talking
the
about.
urge.
Okay.
You don't even have the thought. You don't even have the desire. It just like it just
Mhm.
takes that all away. So like any ever since I found that out, I think about myself thinking about food and thinking about food in like this way that I do not experience it. Like, do I really love to eat ice cream? No. I've observed myself while doing it. And I'm like, is this crazy good? Is this something that should be thinking this much about. And I'm like, no, I know objectively that my mind and body are just tricking me into thinking about ice cream.
Wow.
And so that's been the weird thing about Ozempic, is realizing how much my mind and body are lying to me.
Mm, that's really interesting.
Yeah. There's no way
Um,
I want food as much as they're trying to convince me I do. And I think society does that a lot to us, tries to make us, convinced we want certain things when we don't really want them.
yeah. I mean, the older I get, the more I realize, like, I feel like we're living in a, I mean, we're being bred to just make money and have it taken from us. It
Yeah.
feels like, it feels like. Um,
Yeah. I think that's true-ish.
um,
8 out of 10 true.
some of the you know what's interesting? I was just looking at something. I'm curious your thoughts on this also. Some of the other psychopaths I've met personally all kind of remind me of one movie character in particular, and I've never heard this mentioned before. Maybe I missed it on your channel, but do you know who Ricky Fitz is?
No, I don't.
Ricky Fitz from American Beauty. And I don't mean
Okay.
his actions, I mean his demeanor, the way he kind of presents and goes through life. The psychopaths that I've met
Oh.
act like him. Like there's a calmness, like nothing gets to them ever. Like it just until there's one little thing. I mean, the one person that I know the best or know the most about, honestly, um, seems to only get triggered when someone moralizes him, says, "Hey, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. That's morally incorrect." That is what sends that person into what you refer to as gray rage. But
Yeah. Yeah,
everything
yeah,
else
yeah.
doesn't matter. You can insult him. You can attack him. You can call him a liar, a cheat, a thief. Nothing bothers him until you say, "Hey, you're amoral."
Hmm. That's interesting. I will watch this again, because that's like
Mhm,
another very like I think, let's say we'll use a legal word, material, uh
mhm,
significant, like kind of quality or aspect. I think that is like a experience that a lot of psychopaths share. And I think it comes from, um now I'm thinking like maybe psychopaths have more in common with these Mormon uh wheeler dealers than I thought, because I was just
mhm,
gonna say, like, I feel like psychopaths as children, they feel so put upon,
mhm,
like by the moralizing, the like, you have to be this as a
mhm,
person, otherwise you're not a good person, or you're gonna be punished in these weird ways. Like you're constantly punished for being whoever you are, that you're like, I'm gonna detach myself from any
right.
sense that have that that's who I am, or that I'm anything in particular, I'm, or anyone in particular. I'm just nothing. I'm a nothing, like,
Mhm,
cipher, right? That's kind of like my impression of what often is happening with psychopaths. And so
mhm.
maybe that's more similar to the Mormons than I thought. You're so put upon that you reach your fuck it point,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
press the button, and then you're like, done forever, done for life, in fact.
Mhm,
And then, so when somebody though comes and tries to do this thing that caused you to be so overwhelmed as a child, so to feel so put upon that you preferred disconnecting your sense of self completely forever, rather
mhm,
than constantly feeling the assault that you were experiencing against it, then and then somebody tries to, kind of perpetuate that same style of abuse, which I think
mhm.
it is, which is to try to shame somebody for what they're doing or for who they are, and try to get them to think that they have to actually, be somebody else in order to be considered kind of worthwhile as a person, or like worthy of respect, or whatever it is that the person's kind of trying to threaten to withhold, hey, stop that. That's not what good people do, whatever is the point of what they're trying to do. I would think, from my own experience, at least, this is true. It's super triggering, because not only is it, somebody trying to trample my sense of self, but it feels like it's like I have a very like PTSD almost response,
Okay, yeah,
because
uh-huh.
those
Oh,
were
okay, yeah,
that's the trauma I experienced, and I'm
right.
experiencing the same trauma, in that moment. So I feel all the past trauma
There.
along
Yeah.
with that present comment, and so that's what makes me so kind of like angry.
Oh, that's so interesting. I have wondered, honestly. Do you have to go? Am I holding you too long, or?
No, but can you still hear me? The microphone is like flashing red. Is it still working though?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, weird.
Um, oh, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, I think I forgot what I was going to say. But
Yeah.
hmm.
Was it about Ricky Fitz and about the PTSD?
Yeah. Oh, no, no, no. I know what it was. Possibly sensitive. I'm gonna figure out a way to word this. But, like I mentioned, I was doing a bunch of research on things and looking at as many people within the media and or that we know about that may have tested high on the PCLR or in some manner were confirmed psychopaths. And and then I'd cross-reference that with what the vibe I got off it, based on my own experience or exposure to people that I knew that had psychopathy. And there is a thread that runs through there somewhat. I saw a high number. This is really strange. A high number of people who came from Mormon backgrounds, and I don't know, and I would say like 50%. I felt like I was like, wow, that's wild. And so I wondered about that. The high moral, is that like, what is it like growing up in that? Is it, are you constantly bombarded by, you can't do this, you can do this, and you need to police your thoughts at all times? And does it push people to just give up on trying?
uh yeah, uh I think it 100% uh encourages people at the very least to live a double life, like
Okay.
whether it means to become like a full-blown psychopath where they're living almost such a double life that the other life has died.
Mhm.
There's
Okay.
no authentic life there anymore. It's
Uh-huh.
just like, you know, there's nothing there. But you think about people like my dad or whatever, where it's like he has like this huge concern about the way that he's viewed. And in fact, like recently, so he's also a lawyer, right?
Hmm.
So when people come from the church come in to ask him for like legal services, it's such a hard thing for him to handle because he's really concerned that anything that he does or says is going to get back to like the greater church congregation population at large or whatever, like
Uh-huh.
it's and that it's going to be somehow negative. So he like bends over kind of backwards to not charge them anything, to whatever.
Oh.
He like lives in this
Hmm.
kind of constant fear of
Hmm.
what other people in the church think of him, and it causes him to, in the words of my one friend, who also frequently feels like he has to modify his behavior for whatever
Hmm.
reason, to suck the world's dick, right? That's I think how people think of
Right.
it. And so it's kind of I think it's like there are two ways that you go when you're kind of masking in this sort of way. I actually have a family member that I suspect is the second way. So either you feel like you're sucking the world's dick and you're white knuckling in kind of like this aggressive way in which you like take it out on other people,
Hmm.
or you have like this weird, like you take it out on yourself, probably is like the way to think of it. Like you have like this sense of shame about things and sense that like, you'll like a religious anxiety, I think is what they used to
Hmm.
call it in the 19th century.
Okay.
A true mental condition, like especially when religion was getting ramped up, people were like, oh, I'll never be worthy, I'll never be saved, I'll never be kind of good enough, and they developed kind of this religious anxiety. So I don't think it always leads to kind of psychopathy. I think it can lead to other bad things. Unfortunately, do I think it leads to good things? Hardly. And I think that's like,
Hardly.
yeah,
Okay.
that's like my struggle with, let's say, the Mormon church members for sure, and probably like the Mormon church leadership. My local leadership is fine. They're like all like right way, not. not like, hey, we need to at all costs distort who we are in order to fit this weird preconceived
Mhm.
concept of like, worthy or virtuous or something. But I think there's like a lot of pretending going on in the Mormon church. And I think it's actually even encouraged. Oh, there was I think I forget if I've mentioned this before in a video. Have you heard about the 8 passengers scandal?
No. Oh, wait a
The
second. There's something about that rings a bell, but I'm not sure what it is. 8 passengers. I've heard something about this. What
Yeah.
is it? Okay.
So Ruby Frankie is
Oh,
now in
yeah.
jail. Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
for abusing her children. But her co-defendant, let's call her Jody Hildebrandt.
Yep.
They had like this kind of some people would call it like kind of more of a cult than it was like a
Hmm.
group of people trying to become better parents. It
Hmm.
was called Connections with an X.
Okay.
Uh, and some of the things um oh yeah, so Jody Hildebrandt, some of her background is kind of nuts. Like she was sexually assaulted by people in the church twice. Once when she was like 8 or 9, and then once again while she was a teenager. And after the 8 or 9 one, or the teenager one, I forget. But it's like her talking about herself. I think she has a book in which she talks about this, and she says that when she told her mom about it, the mom said to her back something kind of like this, like, don't forget, Jody, that the church, she said, not Jesus, but the church is everywhere in every part of our life.
Wow.
Like, and specifically said,
Hmm.
like, not Jesus. But I
Hmm.
think that's like, so the mom did not, talk to the parents of the boy who sexually assaulted her. She just decided not to act on that. It was kind of like, okay, that's okay that you got sexually assaulted. We can move on though,
Oh my
kind of
God.
thing. Isn't that
Uh,
nuts? And then she ends up being like whoever she is, like now in jail for child abuse.
yeah.
So I just think that there is very much, that attitude with a lot of Mormons. So I can see how, like, especially like a lot of Mormon parents, I think, justify abuse based on kind of some of these like Mormon principles that they've distorted. Like the same way that my dad justifies being opposed to feeding school children by saying that it breeds entitlement or something. Like they'll
Hmm.
find kind of some reason to think, hey, like it's wrong for us to like, prevent your future sexual assault or the sexual assault of other girls by like mentioning this to anyone. I think that there's a lot of there's that Latin phrase that my girlfriend taught me recently, that it's like better to be not seem, or
Hmm.
yeah, to be rather than to seem is a Latin phrase, esse quam
Okay.
videri, state motto of North Carolina. And I
Hmm.
think that for Mormons, a lot of Mormons, it's the opposite for them. They're like, better to seem, not be.
Uh, okay.
We don't really need to be for some reason. But I think that to even know that there are like people like that in the church who maybe aren't even like true believers or don't even think about Jesus or like have any thoughts about any of that kind of actual core doctrine, but just rather like the fact that it kind of provides just this basic core behavior standards that they can weaponize against other people
Hmm.
is weird. But there's a ton of people like that, I'm sure.
Wow. Well, yeah, I wasn't trying to explicitly say that Mormonism causes psychopathy, but I did inadvertently see a high population of people with Mormon backgrounds. I was kind of surprised at that. Um,
I think also, so when I was talking to this person about CIA assets, the
mm,
thought that the
mm,
person had is that CIA assets, maybe some of these were psychopaths, right?
mm,
And
mm,
and that's why they were willing to do this like stupid thing of like betraying their home government, for like a temporary frustration against the bureaucracy or whatever that they're experiencing. Or temporary worries, financial worries or family worries or whatever. Uh, So kind of like a permanent change in your lifestyle, now becoming a trader for a temporary problem or whatever. And that's kind of what they suggested, is that like the CIA maybe even has come to believe that you'd have to have like some sort of personality disorder or issue with your personality in order to become one of these CIA assets. And I kind of thought like yes and no on this, because I think as the person was talking to me, like no offense to the person if they ever listen to this, I think that they were kind of surprised in talking to me. Like I think they were like trying their like tricks with me of like using my name all the time and stuff. So I was like, fine, I will just do the same thing to you. I will repeat your names.
Uh-huh.
So what,
Uh-huh.
whatever. And I'm just kind of like, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kind of trick you when I said that I'm in Los Angeles time. I don't actually live in Los Angeles. I didn't mean to trick you into, providing your own connection to Los Angeles, or like, I think it would just like weirded them out. There was certain things I think that they just weren't expecting. And I thought, well, probably if you like come into this thinking that your world of experience, which is, CIA assets who make this what you say is a terrible choice, against their own self-interest. And you think those people are the psychopaths, and probably some of them are, maybe even most of them, but that's a particular type of psychopath, and I would say your world of experience, Tony, just knowing hardly anything about you is probably different, because you're not dealing with CIA assets,
Right.
in
Hmm.
like third
Yeah.
world countries or whatever. So like you're probably dealing with like, who are the psychopaths that you meet? They're probably white collar. They're
Hmm.
probably white. They're probably dudes,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I would say for sure that if you're looking at, let's say, they're probably a little bit more successful, although the guy says the CIA assets are also successful in their own sphere. But let's say they're kind of successful, it would make sense to me that they're Mormon, because I would think
Hmm.
that the Mormonism would help a psychopath to be successful, to be a successful psychopath. Not always,
Hmm.
certainly not always, but that the Mormonism, like kind of having like some, let's say additional even socialization,
Mm.
with those 10 hours a week of
Right, right, right,
of
right.
whatever, and that you have so many siblings, probably so many
Hmm.
cousins, so many
Hmm.
uncles and aunts, like you've just been exposed to kind of a lot of humanity, and have, maybe some like a higher likelihood of having connections, stronger than average for a psychopath, connections to one of those people,
Hmm.
that you have all these very, like quite a few, very kind of close connections, either friendship or family. So I think, in the same way that I think people that grow up in great neighborhoods tend to be less likely to be criminals, that's essentially what it is. Like, my girlfriend who's not Mormon is always like, but our kids are going to go to BYU and they're going to go to the ward. She uses all these Mormon terms. And she's like, they can only play with kids from the ward.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah,
Hmm.
she'll say those things, but it's because she has purity issues or whatever. But there's like some truth to it. It's like, there are definitely parts of being part of the community, and having even kind of like moral instruction, like overt moral instruction taught to you at like a very young age. Like they're teaching 2-year-olds to not hit each other and to love each
Hmm.
other and stuff. And like some of that's got to stick a little bit, or
Hmm.
just like shape kind of your attitude about things. And I think in the same way, I just watched uh Deadpool 2,
Hmm.
and spoiler alert for people from the movie, I think it came out in like 2019, but he
Hmm.
like ends up sacrificing himself, and that ends up changing the heart of this kid who is going to grow up to be like basically a serial killer, right? But I think there is something about that. Like if you're exposed to kind of good and love, I think you can build an aesthetic for it. Even a psychopath can kind of build an aesthetic for it. I think also you can not build an aesthetic for it, or still have an aesthetic for it, but like still make mistakes or make choices that are against your thing. Like I think you can still be a bad Mormon psychopath, like a criminal one,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
unsuccessful one, because who knows why? Just like circumstance, or
Mhm.
just just you have like different inclinations than other people do, or maybe you do have some urges that are a little bit bad, and since there's nothing keeping you from the urges, then you do these bad things, right?
Mhm.
Like but yeah, so it wouldn't surprise me that the psychopaths you meet, like the psychopaths that CIA guy meets, tended to be kind of like very impulsive, but it's because they're
Mhm.
CIA assets.
Mhm.
The
Mhm.
psychopaths you meet tend to be Mormon, and it's like honestly, like in the successful psychopath community, I bet it's probably like 5% Mormon at least,
Uh,
5 to 10%.
mhm. Mhm. I'm wondering about that. I mentioned this in the email. Another thing I noticed is a high IQ seems to always be present, and I wonder if
Oh yeah.
or a blind person's hearing becoming extra sensitive, people with
Hmm.
challenges experiencing kind of like a depth of emotions, are they do they evolutionarily kind of compensate with a stronger intellect or like the ability to observe a little bit?
So
What are
for
your thoughts?
sure, I think ability to observe, yes. I would say like the IQs or whatever. My girlfriend and I have a phrase called psychopath stupid. And it's like
Uh-huh.
it's like a mistake that like basically only a psychopath would make. Like just a
Oh,
really stupid
what's an
one that
example of
just
that?
so we were going to go to Paris and we
Hmm.
just missed our flight. So we just were like, hold it, we're getting ready. And I'm like, I'm having a hard time checking in for our flights.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh, it's because they were yesterday?
Oh,
Shoot.
geez. Uh-huh.
That's like a psychopath stupid thing. Just kind of
Okay.
stupid things like that where you're like, since you kind of don't care,
Right.
like you're not really engaged in the world in the same way that most people are, like basically up to their
Uh-huh.
neck, you're like wading into your ankle or something.
Uh-huh.
And it's like just stuff kind of like falls by the wayside.
Interesting.
Yeah. Like I think normal people are like stressed to get to their flight, an international flight,
Hmm.
and we just don't have that stress. And so also we're less careful
Right.
than we would
Right.
otherwise be. Yeah. So I
Hmm.
would say, yeah, I would say observation, certain things, sure. But then there are other things that I think are really underdeveloped developed when it comes to psychopaths. And I would say, so then they're over IQ. I mean, it would be like comparing athletes, like who's a better athlete, LeBron James or like, what's her name? The Simone Biles or whatever. Like, can you really
Mm-hmm.
compare them?
Statistically, maybe like points per game. Right.
Yeah, they're just totally different though. I mean, obviously she would suck in certain circumstances and he would suck in certain circumstances is more I guess what I say. You know, like I think of intelligence largely as being kind of contextual. Although I understand there's
Mhm.
something called IQ or whatever, which seems to be just like your like raw brain power. And that I kind of don't understand either because I used to know that I had like good raw brain power and now I know I have bad raw brain power. So what happened to it? Where did it go? Is IQ not stable? That's what I wonder.
Hmm. I've heard you mention that before. I think I don't necessarily. I mean, I think as we all get older, we slow down in our sharpness. But
Mm.
you seem pretty bright to me.
Well, I hope that I have gotten I compensate, you know, I think in other ways now. I try to when I learn a lesson, I really try to like feel it down to my bones so I don't have to learn it again. In my 20s, I'd, you know, like make the same mistake like 10 times and still not care, not care to learn the lesson.
Is- can you share one of those?
Yeah, let me try to think. You know, one of the things that I'm like really bad at for some reason, and I try to be good about it, is not setting alarms properly and not checking to make
Hmm.
sure that they're set properly. So like I've overslept like taking the SAT. I've overslept, you know, like I think I overslept a calculus final. So I like woke up like yeah, like threw on some
Mhm.
clothes, rushed to there, and you know, I had like just an hour to do like a 3 hour exam or whatever. And since I had planned, you know, to like wake up and kind of, you know, review some of the formulas and stuff, but obviously I didn't have any time to do that. So then I was trying to like reverse engineer a little bit some of the formulas. Try to be like, let's see if I can kind of figure out actually from question 2, if I reverse engineer this a little bit, can I get the formula for what it, is so I can use it for question 6? Um, yeah. What other things have I like overslept? That's like a big one. You'd think that would be something that I would be able to figure out. Like having been, if I'm like allegedly kind of smart or whatever. Another one with music is like I don't check my gear ahead of time. Like I'll show up to something and it's like, oh, this amplifier's blown, or like this chord doesn't work, or I forgot a chord, or whatever. Like so that's probably happened to me like 50 times
Mhm,
like at like professional
mhm,
gigs or whatever, where I'm scrambling. I'm like trying to Google Guitar Center. I'm borrowing stuff from like the people that go on before me and like, Venmoing them money or whatever. Just like constantly having to like figure things out rather than just be like, do I have a cable? Do I have my instrument? Do I
mm,
have the amplifier? Like weird things like that.
mhm. I
Those,
can really
those are,
relate to that. That's
yeah.
interesting. Wow.
But I don't think that necessarily like it's that you have to be psychopathic to not learn from experience, although that is a psychopathic trait. I just think, like when you don't care, kind of like a psychopath doesn't, but you can not care and not be a psychopath. Let's say you don't care about your in-laws or whatever. You show up in your pajamas to like a wedding, who cares?
Have
Like
you done
everybody
anything?
can be like a psychopath. You just have to stop caring about whatever the
Have
thing
you
is.
have you ever done something like that? Have you shown up inappropriately dressed for an event?
Yeah, not ever to just like offend people, just mostly because I was like, it's not on my radar.
Right.
I didn't bother to ask anybody. And then I think, like, okay, looking back on this now, I can see that all the signs were there that I should have dressed up. I had one friend get pissed at me in law school. She's like, I told you that this was whatever, something, something, something. And I was like, yeah, but I read somewhere that like denim is becoming like, like certain types of upscale denim is considered like a little bit formal. And she's like, yeah, but these aren't upscale jeans or whatever. These are just normal jeans you're wearing. I'll be like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess it. I don't know.
Yeah, I knew a guy who everywhere he went, anything he wore, it was dog hair and crumbs
Oh,
all
yeah,
the time.
gross.
Um, yeah, and it didn't need to be that way. Like it was, and it was just because he did not care, doesn't care. It's not on his radar. Also,
Yeah.
there was like a mild hygiene issue that
Oh,
again
yeah.
unnecessary.
Usually, yeah,
Unnecessary. What's that?
yeah, that usually goes together. I have a problem with people's teeth. I don't know why I care so much about my teeth.
Mm.
I have dreams about taking care of my teeth. It's
Oh, interesting.
like flossing and like
Dreams of taking care. That's awesome.
going to the dentist regularly. Yeah,
Okay.
for whatever reason.
Hmm.
As we are wrapping up, do you have any final thoughts or questions?
Let me think here. If I was there anything I missed here that I think no, I think honestly, yeah, I really like I mentioned earlier, I was doing a little bit of research on something, and I just there's on a particular individual for a project I'm doing, and I was trying to reverse engineer this person's background that I have, early life, like what it was like, and everything I kind of hypothesized was confirmed by a lot of things that you were talking about. Like really,
Hmm.
really interesting, really tracks well, honestly.
There is something weird too, I think, thinking back to this idea of like religion and like psychopathy. I don't think it's
Mhm,
just psychopathy. Like, I think religion in some ways, I don't want to say enables bad behavior, but enables kind of a double life. Like
mhm,
I've recently discovered, and I've kind of like alluded to this in other videos last spring, so like maybe like 5ish 6ish months ago, like some horrific details about like one of my family members who's deceased
mhm,
now.
Mhm.
Like, and somebody I knew though, like knew, interacted with, all my older relatives on that family interacted with this person,
Mhm.
and just like, okay, monster, like total monster, total predator, and whatever. And you
Mhm.
just think like, what? Like, how could you keep, and Mormon, how could you keep like going to like this Mormon temple, and you worked at the temple or whatever, and
Come
how
on.
could you like have like such a compartmentalization to like
Mhm.
what you were doing versus what you profess to be doing? But I think too, honestly, and I like hesitate a little bit to get into this at the end, but I think some of it is like they probably experienced the hypocrisy from like church members themselves. So when we think about, for instance, like the popes of like the Renaissance or whatever, they had like 8 kids, 3 different girlfriends,
Mhm.
like I don't think Pope, I think it's Francis, I
Mhm.
don't think current Pope Francis has 8 kids and 3 girlfriends, but there at a certain point that became just what was normal. And I do think at least in certain kind of, let's say, regions or communities of Mormonism, stuff like that was more normal. Like you could be like, killing Native Americans or whatever and still show up to church, and everybody was like, yeah, that's just that double life is just kind of like what we're all doing.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
why would you feel badly about doing this or something?
Mhm.
So it was just kind of like something that became a little bit normalized.
Mhm.
I think about that, like sometimes people can get really messed up, um like it's okay to have kind of this double life, or like, and I think that kind of hurts your sense of reality too, when you're
Mhm.
being told, for instance, at like I can kind of see why somebody like my dad maybe thinks reality is absurd. If he experienced like his own kind of like family members, behaving in a particular way to others versus at home, and then he thinks, okay, reality is absurd, like there's no consistency, or there's no kind of truth or justice kind of at play here, it's just whatever we say, then that's kind of what you kind of take away, and that's what you kind of keep going with. And I think this, like, we get this sometimes in like countries like Venezuela, for instance,
Mhm.
right, where that has been the dominant culture so long that it's just whatever we say. Truth is just whatever we say. That like Nicolas Maduro is like willing to engage in like the most blatant of frauds because it's like there is no reality check,
Mhm.
in these people's minds. Somehow you think like there's got to be like a some breaking point for them, and maybe there is, but they haven't reached it yet, or not
Mhm.
everybody has reached it, or not like enough of them have reached it. So I do think that there's like kind of a way that if you grow up in that type of hypocritical environment that
Mhm.
really undermines reality, I could see how you would have like an almost like an absurdist's view about
Yeah.
it, and that how that would like really allow you, like enable you to do some really messed up stuff yourself,
Mhm. Mhm.
because you'd have no check, no reality check, no any kind of morality check or anything really, because you're like, morality's just a tool that we use on the weak minded, that's
Mhm.
how I grew up, and that's how I was treated, and that's how, you just learn to like kind of operate in those particular ways. And yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great point. And one last question, what are the chances you're going to write another book?
I do want to write another book, and I'm working on it, but intuition says wait a few more months. There's a couple things I still have to learn before I can write it.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it a follow up or is it a completely different
I think in a
genre?
way it's like a follow up. It's not like
Hmm.
so memoir. It's actually like self help is like the genre
Oh,
I would
okay.
say. The working
Hmm.
title is A Neurodivergent's Guide to Belonging, but just about like,
Hmm.
kind of like being true to yourself, figuring out what self is, and like this kind
Hmm.
of internal process, like just things that have worked for me, and
Hmm.
like acquiring a stronger sense of self, And and also kind of like on the flip side, if you do have a really strong sense of self, maybe like an overly active, sensitive sense of self, kind of in the same way that like, you know, things are like allergens to you, they're causing you
Mhm.
irritation or whatever. Like, how do you like basically take the equivalent of an antihistamine to
Mhm.
calm
That's
down, yeah, some of your reactions or whatever.
well, I can say that, reading your book and also, you know, watching your podcast and stuff, I've learned a lot and have applied a lot of things that have helped me. So I'm excited for whatever book you're working on now because I can tell you that it definitely has helped a lot.
Oh, thank you so much, Tony. I
Mhm.
appreciate you. I appreciate you agreeing to come chat me again. It's always interesting. Your questions are super interesting. Um, I always appreciate your thoughtfulness, your perspective on things, and I feel like you ask questions, you know, that prompt in me different answers than anybody else.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
it gets from me. So
Good.
it's nice to even hear my own self be like, oh, I guess that is what I believe. You know, now that I'm thinking about this, I do think these two things are connected. Yeah. So I appreciate that about our conversations and about you.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. With that said, I have to run. Let's chat
Okay.
soon.
All right. Okay. Bye.
Talk to you soon.